Her ammunition was gone. The 3 standard-issue magazines for her Mk-22 rifle, the ones she had signed for and stored in her personal locker, were missing. The specialized 338 Norma Magnum rounds, heavy and precise, had vanished. She stood before the open locker in the pre-dawn chill of the armory, a place that smelled of oiled steel and stale sweat, and felt a familiar coldness settle in her gut, a feeling entirely separate from the desert air. This was the test. Not the one on the range, but the one that always came first. The test of the outsider. The Marines of Forward Operating Base Kestrel had decided she was not one of them, and they had acted on that judgment. But soon they would see that while they played games with bullets, she understood the brutal arithmetic of building them from scratch. Her real test was coming, and she would not fail. Anya Sharma closed the locker door without a sound. No slam of frustration, no muttered curse. The anger was a pilot light inside her, burning low and steady, not a wildfire. It was fuel, not a conflagration. She had arrived 3 days prior, a name on a manifest, a woman with a quiet demeanor and eyes that missed nothing, assigned as a ballistics integration advisor to this remote outpost in a valley simmering with unseen threats. The designation was intentionally vague, a cover for a skill set the Marine Expeditionary Unit's formal structure had no box for. She was older than most of the soldiers, her face a mask of discipline that concealed the topography of a life lived at the sharpest edges of conflict. Her presence was an anomaly, and the Marines, young, proud, and steeped in a rigid culture of belonging, treated it as such. She walked from the armory back to her small, partitioned space in a converted supply depot. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the jagged eastern ridge, painting the dust-choked air in hues of apricot and rose. The base was stirring. The rumble of a generator, the clatter of boots on gravel, the distant bark of a sergeant rousing his squad. She observed it all, cataloging the rhythms of this place. In her brief time here, she had already mapped the base in her mind. The blind spots in the perimeter fence, the predictable patrol timings, the way the afternoon winds funneled through the canyon, a detail crucial for long-range shooting. She also cataloged the people, the swagger of the young riflemen, the weary professionalism of the NCOs, the insulated importance of the command staff. Her gear was laid out on her cot with geometric precision. Among her sparse personal effects was a heavy-duty Pelican case, one that had not been issued by the quartermaster. It was her own. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a weapon, but a set of tools. A small, robust reloading press. Dies for various calibers, including the 338 Norma Magnum. A digital scale accurate to 1/100th of a grain. Calipers. A case trimmer. To the casual eye, it was a hobbyist's kit. To Anya, it was an arsenal in component form, a guarantee of self-sufficiency. This was a lesson learned long ago, in a place far colder and more desperate than this. Never depend on a supply line that can be cut by bureaucracy or malice. She retrieved a small, heavy canvas bag from beneath her cot, the dud bag from the firing range. Yesterday, during a familiarization fire, she had policed her brass, as regulations required. But she had also picked up every other piece of spent 338 brass she could find, casings discarded by the unit's designated marksman. She had also collected several rounds that had been declared unsafe to fire due to dented casings or improperly seated primers. The range safety officer had been happy to let her dispose of them. Now she laid them out on a small cloth. Her hands began to work with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. She sorted the brass, inspecting each casing for stress fractures or critical deformities. Her fingers, deft and sure, were as sensitive as a surgeon's. Some she discarded, but many were viable. Using a hand tool, she carefully deprimed each one, the tiny, spent primers popping out with a faint click. Next came the damaged live rounds. She locked a special die into her press and used a kinetic bullet puller, a simple hammer-like device, to separate the components. A sharp rap on a solid surface, and the bullet and powder were freed from the compromised casing. She poured the salvaged smokeless powder from each round into a clean, dry container, her movements deliberate, preventing any contamination. She knew the powder's burn rate, its properties. She was not just assembling. She was engineering. This was not a game. This was her trade. The dismissal had been swift and condescending. The day she arrived, she was escorted to the command tent to meet Colonel Elias Vance. He was a man carved from the Marine Corps archetype, jaw like a block of granite, a chest full of ribbons that told a story of conventional warfare, and eyes that sized up everyone and everything as either a tool or an obstacle. He held her transfer orders in his hand, looking from the paper to her and back again, his expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Master Sergeant Anya Sharma," he read, his voice flat. He looked at her, at the lack of rank insignia on her sterile uniform. "Your file is thin. Ballistics Integration Advisor. What the hell does that even mean, Master Sergeant?" The title was an honorific from a past life, one she no longer used but which the system had stubbornly retained. "It means I provide technical expertise on precision marksmanship and equipment, Colonel," she answered, her voice even. Her gaze was direct, meeting his without challenge but also without deference. Vance tossed the papers onto his desk. "I have a scout sniper platoon. I have Gunnery Sergeant Tanaka, who can build a rifle from a box of scraps and teach a recruit to hit a target at 1,000 yards. My Marines know how to shoot. What I don't have is time to babysit some specialist from a command I've never heard of." The dismissal was clear. She was a foreign object in his well-oiled machine. "You're an observer. Observe. Stay out of the way. Draw your weapon, check in with the armorer, and find a corner to sit in. We'll be conducting range qualifications for the next week. Don't get underfoot." He had turned away then, a clear signal that the audience was over. He had not asked about her experience. He had not inquired about her needs. He had seen a woman in a tactical environment where he expected only men, a name on a page with a vague job title, and he had filed her away as an irrelevance. Anya had simply nodded and left the tent. The condescension did not anger her. It was a known variable, a constant in the equation of her work. Men like Vance saw the world through the narrow aperture of their own experience. They saw uniforms, ranks, and familiar career paths. Anything outside of that was suspect. She knew that respect in a place like this was not given. It was never given. It was forged in the same crucible as everything else that mattered here: pressure, heat, and performance. The young Marines on the base took their cues from their commander. She saw it in the way they looked past her, the way conversations stopped when she entered the chow hall, the way they gave her a wide berth as if she were contagious. The prank with her ammunition was not a surprise. It was an escalation, a juvenile attempt to enforce the social hierarchy they believed in. They thought they were sidelining her. They had no idea they were simply handing her the stage. Back in her small room, the process continued. She resized the salvaged casings, pushing their shoulders back to the precise headspace required for her rifle's chamber. A minute trim, a chamfer and deburr of the case mouth to ensure a smooth seating for the bullet. Each step was a small, quiet ritual of precision. She measured each powder charge on her digital scale, her brow furrowed in concentration. Not to the standard load, but to a custom specification she had developed over years, one that matched the unique harmonics of her rifle's barrel and the atmospheric conditions of this specific valley. She was not just making bullets. She was making keys for a very specific lock. The bullets themselves, pulled from the damaged rounds, were wiped clean and measured with calipers. Only the most uniform were selected. Finally, she seated the bullets into the charged casings, adjusting the die until the overall length of the cartridge was perfect to the 1,000th of an inch. She worked for hours, a silent, focused island in the growing noise of the base. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the metal roof, turning her room into an oven. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her hands remained steady. She filled one magazine, then a second. 20 rounds. 20 chances to make her point. She did not need more. She was not preparing for a firefight. She was preparing for a demonstration. When she was finished, the 20 hand-loaded cartridges stood in a neat row on her cleaning cloth. They looked identical to factory rounds, but they were not. They were hers. Each one contained her knowledge, her discipline, her cold, quiet anger. Each one was a statement. The Marines of FOB Kestrel had tried to take her voice. So she had built a new one, out of their own garbage, and it was about to speak with unmistakable clarity. In the 3 days she had been on the base, Anya had spent most of her time simply watching. From a shaded spot near the motor pool, she observed the morning physical training, noting the easy endurance of some Marines and the strained efforts of others. She watched the patrols leave and return, analyzing their formations, their posture, their state of alertness. They were good, well-trained, aggressive, confident. But confidence often bred complacency. She saw it in a young corporal who never fully latched his helmet strap, in a fire team leader who always took the same covered position during halts, creating a predictable pattern. She saw it in the way they cleaned their weapons, quickly, functionally, but without the deep, intuitive understanding of the machine that separated a good shooter from a great one. Her observation was not idle. It was a form of infiltration. She was learning the ecosystem of the base, its strengths, its vulnerabilities. Her eyes lingered on the designated marksmen, the Marines equipped with the M110 semi-automatic sniper system. They were the pride of the rifle companies, capable of engaging targets out to 800 meters. She watched them on the range, saw their tight groupings, heard the confident banter between shots. Their gunnery sergeant, Kenji Tanaka, was a master instructor. He moved among his shooters with a quiet intensity, his corrections brief and precise. Tanaka was different from the others. He had glanced at her a few times, a flicker of professional curiosity in his eyes, not the dismissive scorn of the younger men. He was a career Marine, a man who had seen more than one kind of war, and he seemed to reserve judgment. Anya focused on the environment itself. She spent an hour one afternoon just watching the heat mirage shimmer above the distant impact berm of the range. She noted how the distortion shifted as the sun moved across the sky, how the wind, invisible near the firing line, would kick up dust devils 1,000 meters out, betraying its true speed and direction. These were the subtle variables that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss, the kind of details that manuals and classroom instruction could never fully capture. It was a language she was fluent in, a language of physics and intuition. She saw the challenges of this place, the way the thin, high-altitude air would affect bullet trajectory, the way the stark light and deep shadows could play tricks on the eye. The Marines saw a valley. She saw a complex firing problem, a three-dimensional puzzle of ballistics. This quiet period of study was crucial. It armed her with information, the most valuable commodity in any conflict. When she discovered her ammunition was missing, it was this period of observation that informed her reaction. She knew who the likely culprits were. A clique of junior Marines from a rifle squad, led by a cocky corporal named O'Connell and his friend, a private named Martinez. She had seen them watching her, their whispers and smirks barely concealed. They were the ones who embodied the unit's reflexive distrust of her. They thought it was a harmless prank, a way to put the weird outsider in her place before the big qualification shoot. They didn't understand that they weren't just taking her ammunition. They were challenging her very identity. They were questioning her purpose, and for Anya, purpose was everything. Her calm response, her methodical work in building new rounds, was not born of weakness. It was born of a deep, unshakable confidence in her own abilities, a confidence built on a foundation of countless hours of observation, practice, and real-world application that these young Marines could not possibly comprehend. She did not need to confront them. She did not need to report them to the colonel. Their judgment would come, not in a disciplinary hearing, but on the open range in the clear light of day, where skill could not be faked and excuses evaporated in the desert heat. The pressure began to build subtly. The official qualification for all personnel was scheduled for the next day. A notice was posted in the Chow Hall. It was a standard course of fire, but for the Marines of FOB Kestrel it was a matter of pride. Scores were posted publicly. Bragging rights were on the line. For the scout snipers and designated marksmen, it was a chance to reaffirm their elite status. For everyone else, it was a measure of their fundamental competence as a warrior. Anya's name was on the list, a clerical addition that now seemed like a joke. The whispers followed her as she ate her meal in silence. Heard the advisor lost her ammo. One Marine muttered to another, just loud enough for her to hear. Guess she won't be advising us on how to shoot tomorrow. A few snickers followed. Corporal O'Connell and Private Martinez made a point of walking past her table. O'Connell was polishing a shooting medal he wore on his uniform. Gotta be prepared, ma'am, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Can't hit the target if you don't have anything to shoot with. Martinez just grinned. A stupid, boyish grin that made Anya's fingers tighten around her fork. She did not look up. She simply continued eating her food, a portrait of unnerving calm. Her lack of reaction seemed to bother them more than any angry outburst would have. They lingered for a moment, waiting for a rise, and when they got none, they moved on, their bravado slightly deflated. The pressure was not just the lack of ammunition or the impending qualification. It was the social isolation, the deliberate campaign to make her feel useless and unwelcome. Others on the base, even those not involved, kept their distance. No one wanted to be associated with the target of the unit's collective scorn. She was on her own, and everyone knew it. That afternoon, Colonel Vance made a tour of the firing range where the marksmen were conducting their final practice. He watched his best shooters, offering a gruff word of encouragement here and there. He saw Anya, standing by herself several hundred feet away, near the edge of the base, simply watching the distant hills. She held a small Kestrel wind meter in her hand. Taking readings, her expression unreadable. Vance felt a flicker of annoyance. What was she even doing here? His unit was sharp, his men were ready. This woman, this ghost from some shadowy command, was a distraction. He walked over to her, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Master Sergeant," he said, his tone clipped. "Qualification is tomorrow at 0800. I trust you've sorted out your logistical issues." The question was a clear reference to the rumors he had undoubtedly heard. He was testing her, waiting to see if she would complain, if she would point fingers. "I will be ready, Colonel," she replied, her eyes still on the horizon. She did not turn to face him. Her focus was absolute. "Good," he said, though her response clearly unsatisfied him. "See that you are. I don't tolerate excuses on my base." He turned and walked away, his posture rigid. The pressure was coming from all sides now. From the sneering junior enlisted, from the indifferent command, from the silent expectation of failure. For anyone else, it would have been a breaking point. For Anya, it was simply a focusing lens. The noise, the rumors, the condescension, it all faded into the background. All that remained was the problem and her solution. The problem was perception. The solution was performance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, she felt the familiar quiet settle over her. The quiet before the storm. The quiet of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The pressure was not a weight. It was a whetstone, sharpening her resolve to a razor's edge. The morning of the qualification shoot arrived, bright and hot. The air on the range was thick with anticipation and the smell of gunpowder. The Marines were lined up at their designated firing points, rifles resting on sandbags, magazines loaded. There was a low hum of competitive energy. Corporal O'Connell, the self-appointed top shot of his company, was joking loudly with his friends, casting glances toward the edge of the range where Anya Sharma stood alone. She had her Mk-22 rifle, but it was slung over her shoulder. She held no magazines, no ammunition pouches. To the assembled Marines, she was just a spectator, a confirmation of their successful prank. Colonel Vance stood with Gunnery Sergeant Tanaka behind the firing line, a clipboard in his hand, ready to oversee the event. The first relay began. The command, "Watch your lanes," echoed across the range, followed by the sharp, rolling crack of rifle fire. The Marines engaged targets at 200, 300, and 400 meters. Most shot well. O'Connell, as expected, was excellent, his shots grouping tightly in the center of the silhouette targets. After the first relay completed and the range was declared safe, he swaggered back from the line, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Too easy, Gunny," he said to Tanaka. Then he looked directly at Anya. Shame some people couldn't participate. Could have learned something. This was the moment. Anya unslung her rifle. She walked calmly to an open firing point at the end of the line. She laid down her shooting mat, placed her rifle on its bipod, and from a small pouch on her belt, produced a single magazine. She inserted it into the rifle with a solid, audible click. It contained 10 of her hand-loaded rounds. A hush fell over the nearby Marines. O'Connell's smirk wavered. "Where'd you get those?" he demanded. Anya ignored him. She looked at Gunnery Sergeant Tanaka. "Request permission to engage the long-range targets, Gunnery Sergeant." Tanaka looked surprised, then intrigued. The standard qualification ended at 400 meters. The steel targets set out at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters were for the scout snipers only. "That's not part of the qual, ma'am," he said, using a respectful term that stood in stark contrast to O'Connell's tone. "I'm aware," Anya said. "I'm not shooting for qualification. I'm shooting for practice." Colonel Vance strode over, his expression stormy. "What is this, Master Sergeant? I thought you had a supply issue." "It's resolved, sir," Anya said, her hand resting on the stock of her rifle. "Request permission to fire." Vance was about to refuse, but something in her unyielding calm, in the sudden tension that gripped the range, made him pause. He glanced at O'Connell, then back at Anya. He saw the challenge. "Fine," he snapped. "Let's see what you've got. 1 magazine. Don't waste my time." Anya lay prone, settling behind the rifle as if she were an extension of the machine. She took a moment, her eyes scanning the distant targets. Her head canted as she felt the whisper of the wind on her cheek. She did not consult a data book. She did not use a wind meter. She knew. The Marines gathered behind her, a silent, skeptical audience. O'Connell stood with his arms crossed, ready to watch her fail. Anya adjusted the elevation and windage knobs on her scope with a series of precise clicks. Her breathing slowed until it was barely perceptible. She took up the slack on the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a sharp crack that was deeper, more resonant than the others. A second later, a clear, high-pitched ping echoed back from the distance. A direct hit on the 800-meter steel. A murmur went through the crowd. She worked the bolt action with fluid efficiency, ejecting the spent custom casing, chambering a new round. She fired again. Ping. 800-meter target. She shifted her aim slightly. Another shot. A longer pause. Then, a fainter but still distinct ping. The 1,000-meter target. The murmuring stopped. The Marines were completely silent now, their eyes wide. O'Connell's jaw was slack. Anya was a machine. Shot after shot, she sent rounds downrange. Each report was followed, after a breathless delay, by the satisfying ring of steel. She hit the 1,000-meter target 3 more times, then transitioned to the 1,200-meter target, an almost invisible speck in the shimmering heat. She paused for a full 10 seconds, her body perfectly still. The rifle fired. The wait seemed to last an eternity. Then, the sound came back. A tiny, tinny plink. The sound of a miracle. She had hit it. She proceeded to hit it 3 more times. 10 shots, 10 hits, from 800 to 1,200 meters, with ammunition she had built herself from scraps. She worked the bolt one last time, ejecting the final casing, and cleared the weapon. She stood up, brushed the dust from her uniform, and slung her rifle. The range was tomb silent. She had not spoken a word. She had not boasted. She had not even looked at them. Her actions had spoken with devastating eloquence. She walked past the stunned group of Marines, past a pale and shaken Corporal O'Connell, and past Colonel Vance, whose face was a mask of disbelief. As she passed, she paused and dropped the 10 gleaming, empty brass casings on the ground in front of O'Connell and Martinez. "You can have these back," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a hammer blow. "I'm done with them." Then she walked away, leaving a crater of silence in her wake. The atmosphere on FOB Kestrel shifted as if a pressure front had moved through. The story of the range demonstration spread through the base like wildfire, embellished with each telling. The impossible shots, the handmade bullets, the cold dismissal of O'Connell. It became an instant legend. The looks Anya received were no longer dismissive. The whispers were not of scorn, but of awe and a little bit of fear. Marines would stop talking when she entered a room, not to exclude her, but because they were suddenly intimidated, unsure of what to say. They gave her a wide berth, not out of contempt, but out of a new, grudging respect. They had treated her like a novice, and she had revealed herself to be a master of a craft they were only just beginning to understand. Colonel Vance watched her from the window of his command tent as she crossed the compound. His mind was racing, reevaluating everything. The condescending interview, the rumors, his own dismissive attitude. He had made a colossal error in judgment. This woman was not a bureaucrat or an observer. She was a weapon, and he had treated her like a piece of broken equipment. He felt a cold knot of professional embarrassment in his stomach. He had underestimated her completely, and in his line of work, underestimation was a fatal sin. He turned from the window and barked at his aide. "Get me Gunnery Sergeant Tanaka. Now!" Tanaka arrived minutes later, his expression as impassive as ever, but Vance could see a new light in his eyes. "You saw that, Gunny?" Vance asked, pacing his tent. "I did, sir," Tanaka said. His voice was quiet. "I've never seen anything like it. Not from a cold bore. Not with handloads made from range scrap." "Who is she?" Vance demanded, gesturing vaguely in the direction Anya had gone. "Her file is a ghost story. Ballistics advisor is bullshit. Nobody shoots like that without a history. Along 1 inch. Tanaka hesitated for a moment. "Sir, there are stories, legends you could call them, in the community, about operators who are different. People who exist outside the normal chains of command. Ghosts. The name Sharma? It rings a bell, but I can't place it," he paused, looking at the colonel directly. "Her form, sir. Her breathing control. The way she reads the wind without instruments. That's not taught. That's earned. In places we don't talk about." Meanwhile, in the barracks, Corporal O'Connell and Private Martinez were the new pariahs. Their squad mates avoided them. The easy confidence O'Connell once wore was gone, replaced by a nervous, haunted look. He kept replaying the scene in his head. The impossible shots, the sound of the empty casings hitting the dust at his feet. It wasn't just that she had outshot him. She had done it on her own terms, using their own petty cruelty as a catalyst. She had dismantled his pride with 10 pieces of brass and lead. He and Martinez were summoned by their platoon sergeant, a grizzled staff sergeant who had seen the whole thing. He didn't yell. His voice was low and menacing. "You two idiots," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't just pull a stupid prank. You tampered with the gear of an asset attached to this unit. You have any idea the kind of trouble you're in? The only reason the colonel hasn't had you crucified is because he's trying to figure out who the hell he's been pissing off for the last 3 days." The 2 young Marines stood at a rigid brace, pale and sweating. The shift was complete. Anya Sharma was no longer the outsider. She was the mystery, and in a place like FOB Kestrel, mystery commanded more respect than any rank. The second test came less than 48 hours later. It did not come on the controlled environment of the firing range, but in the chaotic reality of the valley. A long-range reconnaissance patrol, call sign Ghost 1, was monitoring a suspected insurgent supply route high in the northern ridges when they were compromised. A burst of heavy machine gun fire erupted from a cave complex across a deep, winding canyon, pinning them down behind a small rock outcropping. The enemy position was well fortified, dug into the mountainside. The patrol was trapped. The crackle of panicked radio transmissions filled the Tactical Operations Center. "TOC, this is Ghost 1. We are taking effective fire from grid 345 to 981. Pinned down. We cannot maneuver." Colonel Vance stood over the map, his face grim. A drone feed on a large monitor showed the patrol's precarious position. For Marines huddled behind rocks that seemed far too small. The drone zoomed in on the enemy position, a dark slit in the rock face nearly 1,700 meters away from the trapped patrol. What are their assets? Vance snapped at the radio operator. They have a designated marksman, sir, but the range is extreme. He can't get a stable shot and the angle is bad. The enemy is dug in deep. Air support was 20 minutes out. A lifetime for the men under fire. The patrol leader came back on the radio, his voice strained. TOC, we have one man wounded. We can't hold this position for long. Vance felt a surge of adrenaline and frustration. His men were being cut to pieces, and he was helpless. His eyes scanned the TOC, looking for a solution, any solution. And then he saw her. Anya Sharma had entered the TOC silently. She hadn't been summoned. She had likely heard the radio traffic and come on her own. She stood near the back, watching the drone feed with an unnerving stillness. Her expression was one of intense concentration, as if she were already solving the firing problem in her head. In that moment, Vance's pride, his skepticism, all of it evaporated, replaced by a desperate need. He looked directly at her, his gaze pleading. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice cutting through the noise of the TOC. "Can you make that shot?" It was not a question about hitting the patrol. He was asking if she could hit the machine gun nest from a position on the base perimeter. It was an impossible distance. From the base, the target was over 1,900 meters away, a staggering range that pushed the 338 Norma Magnum to its absolute ballistic limit. The wind in the upper canyons would be a nightmare. The shot was, by any textbook definition, impossible. Anya looked from the screen to the colonel. She didn't offer caveats or probabilities. She didn't mention the extreme range or the difficult conditions. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Yes, Colonel. Get her what she needs." Vance roared. "Now!" There was no hesitation. An ATV was brought to the front of the TOC. Marines scrambled to get her gear. Gunnery Sergeant Tanaka appeared at her side, holding out 2 boxes of match-grade ammunition. "These are from my personal stash," he said quietly. "Lot tested." Consistent. Anya took the boxes and gave him a brief, grateful nod. As she climbed onto the ATV, Tanaka grabbed a high-powered spotting scope. "I'm your spotter," he said. It wasn't a request. She nodded again. The two of them, the old gunny and the mysterious Master Sergeant, sped off toward a high point on the western edge of the base, a rocky promontory that offered the clearest possible line of sight into the northern canyon. Back in the TOC, everyone held their breath. They were placing the lives of 4 Marines on a single shot that bordered on science fiction. As Anya and Tanaka raced towards the overlook, Colonel Vance turned to his intelligence officer, a young captain. "I want to know who she is," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Not the cover story. Everything. Use my authority. Break whatever seals you have to. I want to know right now." The captain, sensing the gravity in the colonel's voice, immediately bent over his terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He began pulling up Anya Sharma's file, the same one Vance had dismissed days ago. But this time, he used the colonel's high-level clearance codes to dig deeper, past the firewalls and redacted paragraphs. On the overlook, Anya was already setting up. The wind was gusting, unpredictable. Tanaka was beside her, his spotting scope focused on the distant cave. "I have the target," he said, his voice steady in his headset, which was patched into the TOC. "Heavy machine gun. Appears to be a DSHK. 3, maybe 4 personnel." Anya lay prone, her rifle settled. She wasn't using the ammunition Tanaka had given her. Instead, she loaded a single round from the small batch she had made herself. She trusted her own work above all else. She closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the bullet's path, a long, graceful arc across the vast expanse. She pictured the wind pushing it, the thin air offering less resistance, the planet's rotation subtly pulling it sideways. Back in the TOC, the intelligence captain's eyes went wide. "Sir," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Oh my God, Vance was at his side in an instant. "What is it?" "Spit it out, Captain." The captain pointed at the screen. Most of the file was still a wall of black redactions, but a few fields had been unlocked. Under previous unit, it listed an operational group so secret most in the military had never heard of it. And under call sign was a single word, Carice. Vance stared at the word. It meant nothing to him. But Tanaka, hearing the captain's exclamation over the command net, went rigid. His head snapped up from his spotting scope. "TOC, say again that call sign," he transmitted, his voice tight. "Call sign is Carice," the captain repeated, his voice awed. "Keres." In the TOC, a deathly silence fell. Vance looked at his S2. "What is Carice?" The captain was frantically typing. "Sir, it's a legend, a ghost story from the early days in Afghanistan. A single operator, part of a special missions unit. They were sent in when a target was designated unreachable, a sniper who made a series of impossible shots that changed the course of several major engagements. They were credited with over 200 confirmed kills, many at extreme range, including taking out an enemy commander from a moving helicopter at night. No one knew if Carice was a man or a woman, or even a real person. The file was sealed at the highest level. Sir, the captain looked up at Vance, his face pale. Carice was the personification of the violent fates in Greek mythology, the bringers of death. On the overlook, Tanaka lowered his head, a look of profound understanding on his face. He looked at the woman lying beside him, perfectly calm, about to attempt the impossible. The legend was real, and she was here on their base. He keyed his mic again, his voice now hushed, directed at the TOC but meant for everyone. "You have no idea," he said. "Carice, the ghost of the Hindu Kush. I heard stories from old-timers in Marsoc. We thought it was just a myth to scare new guys." He turned back to Anya, his respect absolute. "Sending," he said, giving her the final wind call. Anya exhaled slowly, her finger tightening on the trigger. The shot broke the silence, a single, sharp command. The shot was gone. In the TOC, everyone stared at the drone feed, a collective breath held. The bullet was traveling, an invisible messenger of physics and will, covering nearly 2 kilometers of empty space. On the overlook, Anya was already working the bolt, her eyes never leaving the scope, her expression unchanged. Tanaka watched through his own optics, tracking the vapor trail. "Good trace," he murmured. "Looks good." The seconds stretched into an eternity. For the men of Ghost 1, huddled behind the rocks, the enemy machine gun continued its relentless hammering. Then, on the drone feed, a small puff of dust and rock exploded from the lip of the cave, just inches from the machine gun's muzzle. A miss. A collective groan went through the TOC. "Damn it," Vance muttered, his fist clenching. "So close. Stand by." Tanaka's voice crackled over the radio. That was a ranging shot. On the overlook, Anya made a minuscule adjustment to her scope. 2 clicks of elevation, 1 half-click of windage. She had her data. She chambered another of her custom-loaded rounds. She did not rush. Her movements were fluid, economical. The panic in the TOC, the desperation of the men on the ridge, none of it touched her. There was only the rifle, the target, and the space between. She settled, breathed, and fired again. This time, the wait was even more agonizing. Everyone knew this was it. The element of surprise was gone. If she missed now, the enemy would know they were being targeted and could shift position. The drone feed remained fixed on the dark cave mouth. And then it happened. Not a puff of dust, but a bright, violent flash from deep within the cave, followed a split second later by a cloud of dark smoke and debris that billowed out of the entrance. The heavy, thudding report of the enemy machine gun ceased abruptly. Silence. Splash! Tanaka yelled into his mic, his voice electric with triumph. "Target destroyed. Good hit. Good hit. The gun is silent." A chorus of cheers erupted in the TOC. Men were clapping each other on the back, shouting with relief. On the drone feed, the 4 Marines of Ghost 1 were seen cautiously raising their heads, then scrambling to their feet, pulling their wounded comrade to better cover. The threat was gone. Colonel Vance sagged against the map table, the tension draining out of him. He looked at the screen where the call sign Carice still glowed. He had asked a legend to make an impossible shot, and she had delivered. Anya and Tanaka packed their gear in silence. The job was done. There was no celebration on the overlook, just the quiet satisfaction of a difficult task completed. As they rode the ATV back towards the main compound, the sun was beginning its descent, bathing the valley in a soft, golden light. The respect she had earned on the range had been built on skill. The respect she had just earned was built on something more profound. She had saved lives. She had become part of the unit's story in the most fundamental way possible. When the ATV pulled up to the TOC, the atmosphere was entirely different. The group of Marines who had gathered outside parted to let her through. Their faces, which had once held smirks and suspicion, were now filled with an open, unambiguous reverence. As she dismounted, a young lance corporal she didn't know met her eyes and gave her a crisp, formal nod of respect. She returned it. As she walked toward her quarters, the scene repeated. Marines stopped what they were doing, cleaning weapons, working on vehicles, simply talking. They stood a little straighter. They watched her pass. It was not a formal salute, not yet, but it was a clear, silent acknowledgement. Corporal O'Connell and Private Martinez stood near the armory. They saw her coming. Martinez looked at the ground, unable to meet her gaze. O'Connell, however, stood his ground. As she drew near, he came to the position of attention, his back ramrod straight. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a rigid statue of shame and newfound respect. Anya paused in front of him. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and continued on her way. The gesture was not one of forgiveness, but of closure. The matter was finished. Colonel Vance was waiting for her outside the command tent. He stood alone, without his aide, without his clipboard. He just stood there, a man waiting. As she approached, he took a step forward. He did not offer platitudes or effusive thanks. His voice was low and steady, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "Master Sergeant Sharma," he said, using the rank with a weight it had not possessed before. He looked her directly in the eye. "That was the finest piece of marksmanship I have ever witnessed." He paused. And then, in a gesture that stunned everyone within sight, he raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory salute of a senior officer to a junior. It was a salute between warriors, a sign of ultimate professional respect, offered from a man who had been completely, utterly wrong. Anya stopped. She stood straight, brought her own hand up, and returned the salute with matching precision. They held it for a moment, the setting sun glinting off the rank on his collar and the bare fabric of her sleeve. In that silent gesture, everything was understood. The dismissal was erased. Respect had been earned. Night fell on FOB Kestrel. The base was quiet, the adrenaline of the day having subsided into a tired, grateful calm. The men of Ghost 1 were back, their wounded comrades stable in the medical bay. The story of the shot, now intertwined with the legend of Carice, was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the barracks and chow hall. Anya Sharma was no longer an anomaly. She was a guardian angel, a myth made real. In her small, Spartan room, Anya sat on the edge of her cot. The overhead light cast a simple, stark illumination. On a small folding table before her, her MK-22 rifle was disassembled, its components laid out on a clean cloth in a precise, orderly fashion. She was cleaning it. Her hands moved with the same methodical grace she applied to everything, wiping away the carbon and dust of the day's work. The smell of gun oil filled the small space, a familiar, comforting scent. Beside the rifle parts lay a single, gleaming brass casing. It was the second round she had fired that afternoon, the one that had flown true across the canyon. She had retrieved it from the overlook before she left. It was a memento, a physical record of a problem solved. She worked in silence, her focus absolute. The events of the day, the condescension, the challenge, the vindication, the respect, they were all in the past now. She did not dwell on them. She did not bask in the newfound admiration of the men on the base. Her satisfaction came not from their approval, but from the successful execution of her craft. The world outside her small room could change, opinions could shift, but the constants of her life remained. The cold logic of ballistics, the discipline of her own mind and body, and the unwavering reliability of the tools she maintained with such devotion. A soft knock came at her door. She looked up, her hands stilling. "Come in," she said, her voice quiet. The door opened, and Gunnery Sergeant Tanaka stood there, holding a steaming mug. "Thought you might want some coffee," he said. "It's the good stuff I keep for myself." He stepped inside and placed the mug on the corner of her table, careful not to disturb the rifle parts. He looked at the disassembled weapon, at the single spent casing. "The men from Ghost 1 wanted me to thank you," he said. "They know you saved them." "I was doing my job, Gunnery Sergeant," Anya replied, picking up a cleaning rod. "That wasn't a job, Master Sergeant," Tanaka corrected her gently. "That was a miracle." He paused, his eyes full of a deep, professional respect. "The stories, they didn't do you justice." He didn't say the name Carice. He didn't have to. It hung in the air between them, an acknowledged truth. He nodded once, a gesture of profound solidarity. "If you need anything, anything at all, you come to me." He then turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Anya watched the door close, then looked at the mug of coffee. A small, almost imperceptible softening touched the corners of her mouth. She picked up the rifle's bolt, its surface cool and smooth, and continued her work. The rifle, her hands, the quiet room. This was her sanctuary. The respect she had won was a welcome byproduct, but her core identity was here, in the silent, disciplined mastery of her trade. The symbolic image lingered. A woman alone, not lonely, finding her peace not in the noise of praise, but in the quiet ritual of maintaining the instrument of her will. Her dignity was intact, her purpose reaffirmed. She had come to this place an outsider and had become its silent protector, a testament to the undeniable power of pure, unadorned competence. The night was deep, and she had work to do.